All right, we are resuming the Education Economic Matters. Education Economic Development Subcommittee meeting. Thank you so much for hanging in there with us. We have our community colleges with us. Brad Phillips, thank you for coming back on. We appreciate you understanding, and we look forward to hearing from you. So the floor is yours. Oh, and congratulations on the new job.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and I'm very happy to wait. I know it's been much of a long day, more for you than me. So I'm happy though to be here and maybe get to answer some of these questions. And as in my humble opinion, you're saving the best to last. So again, thank you. My name is Brad Phillips. I'm the new Executive Director for the Maryland Association of Community Colleges. And I'm here on behalf of all of our 16 member community colleges. And before we begin, I just want to thank the committee for their work on all of these issues, and we're very pleased with the way that the budget numbers look for us this year. From a historic perspective, this is monumental. This will be the first time that we've ever actually achieved full funding within the CADE formula, which is that 29% funding per FTE tie. That formula was put in place in the 90s, and we're getting there. So I don't want that moment to be lost. We do have one small issue that's being resolved with Prince George's Community Colleges and MOE, and we're looking forward to resolving that issue so all Maryland's higher education institutions can receive an increase in the governor's budget and the state budget. So with that, I'll start on the analysis, and I too want to thank the work being done on the analysts. I think they hit the major issues specifically right now. They're asking the right questions. And we're talking about transfer, mobility, and progress, and how are we doing on those things? And the questions, especially during the pandemic, where we see from the analysis that some of those things are not trending in the right direction. But the first question we were asked to talk about was, what are we doing to facilitate transfer? And this is really something that is long lasting. We've been working on this issue way before the pandemic, and we'll continue to work on this way after the pandemic. But I will say that there's been a number of really positive changes that have been undertaken on transfers, starting way back with the College Completion and Career Readiness Act of 2013, and as late as last year with the work of the Transfer with Success Act that Delegate Solomon and the committee passed through. It was that I think is going to be a game changer, and I know MHEC has got some testimony on that as well, but I do think that's going to really improve the process. What that did is really provide some transparency into the process for students moving from our institution to a four-year institution. And we will, for the first time, actually be able to get an understanding as to if a course isn't accepted, why. And the regulations that have been promulgated as a result of the Transfer with Success Act will really help, I think, with mobility. There's obviously more work to do. The regulations still need to be approved, but there's a lot of positives that have come out of that process. And what it's really done is provide a common framework for all institutions to play on. And one of the things that the chancellor mentioned as well is something we're hoping to come back around this year and work out, which is really providing a platform or funding a platform with state support that will require all institutions to utilize so that the system can be maintained, students can have accounts when it comes to ARTSIS, and they can see exactly how their courses will transfer to a four-year institution so that they will know that what's in that system is accurate and up to date. I think that will help tremendously. There's still, I think, more work to be done on making sure that we capture all the students that have stopped out and coming back, and making certain that the seamless transfer and that they're moving through the process. But we're positive on the right direction, at least, is where we're going. And we're looking forward to working with some of you on that legislation on funding ARTSIS going forward this year. The second question we were asked to talk about was, what actions are we doing with COVID and the spring instruction? I think, again, this is one of those issues where if you really look at what's happened with the disproportionate impact that COVID has had on students going into higher education, the analysis will show you that it's community colleges where the bulk of those students have stopped out. Over 10%, I believe, I saw in the analysis. We've got to figure out a way to get those students back into our institutions. And part of that is overcoming the challenges that COVID has put in our way and allowing more students to come back to our campuses to take some of the courses that will require them to be in person. It's really a compounding impact, because if you look at the shortages in the labor force, when you look at the supply issues that we have, those jobs, we haven't been able to fully have students enrolled because they have to be in person. But we feel like we're turning the corner on that and getting more people back into the classroom that's permissible, or into those courses that require labs or hands-on experience. So we think that we're moving in the right direction. If we can keep the pandemic from having another spike, we're doing all sorts of different mitigation strategies, just like some of the other institutions have mentioned. We've delayed some of our return to campus. We've put some online for the first 2 weeks. We've created compressed semesters, so students who had stopped out or didn't enroll at the right period can come later and still enroll and take the course in a compressed time period instead of a traditional 15 weeks. We have mandates on masks. Some of our institutions whose boards have approved it have vaccine mandates. So we are doing an array of mitigation strategies to deal with returning to class this spring. And I think that as time goes on, we will recover from this enrollment decline, but it's getting more people back in in-person courses. And it's just a matter of letting students understand that they can't stop out now. They have to continue. And if they stop out now, they could be stepping off the path to a middle class and cause a lifelong and generational issues for their families if they do not get some type of credential and enter into the workforce. So with that, I'll stop and take any questions that you all have.
Thank you, Brad. Thanks for the presentation and answering our questions today and sticking with us. Any questions for our community colleges? Delegate Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And hello, Brad. As you can see, I'm a newer member of the committee and also a big fan of community colleges. A question I had for you, looking at the analysis, and know that we want to grow not just peer degrees, but also certain certifications for high demand, skills. And so I wanted to know what type of marketing or targeting do you do? Because I think sometimes people don't realize that something short of an associate's could also be very beneficial. And I'd be curious to know, how are we kind of making that linkage to either high school or other young adults, who might not be aware of those opportunities?
That's an absolutely great question. And we do a lot of outreach in this area with our high schools, and we try to work with our counselors. And as you know, that the blueprint legislation has really laid out an interesting framework for students to gain access to all sorts of different post-secondary pathways once they have been declared college and career ready in the 10th grade. And we're really working to build that out for apprenticeships as well. And we have all types of what would be considered your non-typical apprenticeship opportunities as well. And I know Howard has, Learn to Earn, as far as opportunities for students in your county, that has really paid off and gotten a lot of people into the workforce. But more can be done, and more should be done to provide those opportunities for students who are on the margins, who are thinking, I don't necessarily want to go to college to earn a degree, but if I went into this direction, it would really give me a sort of the income and the lifestyle that I could afford to have a comfortable life. And I think that we're working to do that. The pandemic has clearly caused a major hurdle in doing that, but we're still working with every opportunity with employers and the high schools to make the case.
Mr. Chair, can I just add one brief thing?
Yes.
I just wanted to say that oftentimes when we're talking about higher ed, we tend to think about someone immediately leaving high school. And I think maybe an untapped universe of people that might be able to benefit from community college are the parents of these young people. And I wonder if there could be a better linkage between the community school coordinators themselves at all the younger grades, because many times the parents might need some skills and maybe can't commit to a 4-year trajectory, but maybe something less, just something else to kind of think outside of the box. Thank you for your time.
No, that's an absolutely good point, with the average age of a community college student being 25. A lot of the mechanics of higher ed don't really take that into consideration. If you look at the financial aid process, it's all geared towards recent high school students. But if you're an adult learner, you don't know the deadlines. You don't know when the right time is. So very good points.
So I'll concur. I do think Delegate Smith makes some good points here. And I think, Brad, you should know our Chair McIntosh, has charged this subcommittee with really looking at the holistic approach of community colleges in a long-term way. I think we're going to probably start that process this year to look at, how you're educating students, what you're providing them. Are we giving them what they need in a modern economy, to Delegate Smith's point, with certifications, and what we can do to help you with what you clearly are understanding is a changing dynamic of students. So stay tuned on that. We want to work together with you on that, and we'll have more information as we go. But we appreciate all the work you do in the state for our students.
Please let me know. That's very intriguing and good to hear, refreshing to hear. I'll just say my closing thought, if you listen to anything I've said, if you look at the students that are enrolled in undergraduate opportunities in Maryland, the majority of Maryland undergraduate students are going to your community colleges. So that's a major thing to consider when you're focused on what you just said, Chairman Barnes.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for being with us. And again, thanks for hanging in there.
Thank you.
We're going to move to our secretary, Piedler, who's hung in there all afternoon with us, and we appreciate that very much. And we're very anxious to hear what you have to say. So the floor is yours, Mr. Secretary.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman Barnes. It's good to see you and members of the committee again. I enjoy our working relationship. I'd first like to compliment Mr. Klein and Ms. Baker on their excellent analysis and presentation. When you consider all of the data that's available and how they've been able to condense it, it's just phenomenal in their presentations. I'd also like to introduce members of my team that are with me in case there's other additional questions. Dr. Emily Dow, Jeffrey Newman, and Dr. Barbara Smertz are available. First, I want to thank you for your support in continuing record investment in higher education, which is nationally recognized as a center of innovation that supports our state's economy. As you know, Maryland ranks as one of the top 3 states for PhDs in the workforce, the percentage of baccalaureate degrees in the workforce, and for very heavy research and development funding. I want to congratulate all of the higher education sectors and segments, public 4-year, private 4-year community colleges, and private career schools on their success in responding to the challenges of this pandemic. You should know that we have coordinated bi-monthly segmental COVID meetings that continue to this day to address the changing demands of disease mitigation caused by the pandemic. And both of the analysts have been attending a number of those meetings. Starting in March of 2020, which is now almost 22 years ago, we held a webinar with representatives from all the higher education segments, which included hundreds of participants, probably 100 in person, and then the rest online. This ongoing coordination effort has included successful communications with the state health department, both local and state offices. We've also included the institutions, the segments, and other health departments, again, at the local level, have been instrumental. One of the very early successes was the sharing of the contacts between our institutions and the local health departments, which was indeed fortuitous, especially for our community colleges. Our discussions have included assistance with locating low temperature freezers for their very early vaccine storage, CDC and departmental guidelines, scientific presentations, inventory needs, testing and contact tracing methods, procedure supplies, and site availabilities. This is an ongoing effort. These meetings continue to demonstrate the connectiveness of our state departments and institutions. The departmental and institutional communications through consistent, timely, concise, and focused messages have been successful in demonstrating confidence to our citizens. INHEC coordinates and compiles the monthly institutional COVID operational status reports that is shared with your offices and the rest of the legislature. Governor Hogan's 2 executive orders for allied health licensing assistance were major lifts to augment the health field with eligible students. The colleges of nursing have been most active participant in this effort. And I can't emphasize enough the willingness of our segments to overcome the traditional institutional barriers to work cooperatively and collaboratively to address these issues. I must tell you, however, I'm very, very proud to be part of the very successful Higher Education Commission team and its accomplishments for students, institutions, and our state. Our state plan to improve access, success, and innovation across the segments of higher ed. To that end, DLS has put part of the analysis in there that shows graduation rates improving, as well as other very critical analysis. A question was raised earlier about those students that do not complete a degree and what can be done. There are approaches already implemented by institutions. Intrusive advising is implemented at several institutions. This is using a software program to monitor students' performance so they can get to the student before there's an issue of failing out or dropping out. There are near completer scholarships, which the state has to support students that have gotten through 75% towards their degree, but failed to complete. So these scholarships help pay for them to come back. Several institutions have established emergency funds to support student financial emergencies and prevent dropout. There's also, with the pandemic, a tremendous response in the use of technology to improve the scheduling flexibilities that make it easier for students to attend at all hours. There's workforce scholarships, and what Delegate Smith was just asking about in terms of the new fields. If it's not directly into an associate's degree or four-year degree, there are scholarships now available called workforce shortage scholarships, which are tied to areas of highest need. In this year's state budget, the governor's recommended a tremendous increase in our teaching scholarships and nursing scholarships. There's also, as you've already heard today in testimony, tremendous improvement in the transferability and transparency that we need for students to know how they can matriculate. During the last 7 years, MHEC has awarded over $1.1 billion in scholarships, tax credits, and grants. 921 million in the over 24 different scholarship programs administered by MHEC. The nurse support programs has awarded 136 million. What this means is that we award the scholarships to the nurses so they can get the degrees to become teachers of nursing. There's been $41 million in the debt relief tax credits. The Community College Promise Program, we're now at 19 million. It's been, and as you know, that was passed a couple of years ago, and that's been very helpful for the community colleges. These achievements supported over 420,000 students to pursue their higher education goals. You think about it, that's enough to fill a Ravens Stadium 5 times. MHEC has also improved our academic review approval process and have approved 750 new academic programs. And we are hopeful that with the settlement of the 16-year coalition case behind us, it will result in increased innovation. And I want to thank the legislature for adding the 10 pins into that legislation, which will help us review all that HBCU submissions. The pandemic has, in fact, had an immediate and dramatic operational impact on higher ed, increasing costs and decreasing revenues. The pandemic has also magnified the financial barriers for student entry and matriculation. As Brad just indicated, it has dramatic impact on those with our least financial means. It's also magnified the technology disparities within the state of Maryland. The lack of access to broadband, internet, and technology remain a barrier to success. With that, I'd conclude and just thank you for your continuing support and the recognition of the importance of higher ed. And if you have any questions.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your testimony. I think we do have questions. Mr. Secretary, I think our Vice Chair, who I'd like to introduce you to, Vice Chair Solomon, is a very important part of our subcommittee. Vice Chair of this subcommittee, an important part of our Appropriations Committee. So ask that you really get to know him. I think he has a question. Vice Chair Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. I wanted to start off actually by thanking Dr. Dow, who has been just a really great partner in a lot of the work that we've done around transfer. And sometimes I feel like she's literally carrying the weight of all of the policy changes that we're trying to do on her shoulders on a whole variety of areas. So just wanted to start off by saying thank you to her. And I did want to ask, I'm a little frustrated that we still haven't seen final regs yet on, on transfer with success. It looked like in the testimony, it was originally supposed to be offered to the commission on the 26th, which would have been yesterday. I didn't see it on the agenda, so just curious when we can expect it. What's the holdup?
Okay, I'll have her answer that directly, but the holdup is we're having our HEs review everything very carefully because there's a lot in these regulation changes. Dr. Dow?
Sure, thank you, Chair. Great to see you, Delegate Solomon and other committee members. Yeah, we are anxious to move these forward, but we want to get it right. That's the reality. And I will tell you, I've met with our AG almost weekly to review the proposed regulations to make sure that they're organized in a way that makes sense and are legally sound. We've of course added the major element of the denial of credit, but we've cleaned up a lot of the language and made sure, so for example, you can see it in our testimony, making sure we're using the word credit and course in the right context, because sometimes it is transfer of credit, sometimes it is transfer of course. We've also realized, and this is not included in our testimony, that we really do need to open up, and I know Delegate Solomon, you're very aware of this, credit for prior learning, because credit for prior learning, everything beyond earned transcripted college credit also plays a role in transfer of credit. So we've been creating kind of a short list while doing these regulatory changes for transfer. We're likely going to have to make changes to credit for prior learning and convene a similarly relevant stakeholder group and garner input. So that's all to say we're trying to do it right. And I know that means just a little bit more time, but we want to get it right. The other thing that we've been working on in conjunction with all of this is a pretty layman's term guidance document that's meant to be, fill in the blanks for everything in the regulations. That would be for registrars, for transfer coordinators, for faculty advisors, so that they don't have to reference the regulations, but they mirror the regulations and put it into plain language. And so while we're making these regulatory changes, I want to make sure that guidance document lines up and that the regulations actually do what we're saying we want them to do. So that's been the challenge, and that's what's been slowing this process down. So I do recognize the urgency, but we haven't, Dr. Phillips has been on the work group. The changes that we're making at this point are minor enough that they don't merit going back to the group because they're stylistic and just formatting. So I'm hopeful that the February commission is when we'll be able to start the full regulatory process, at which point we'll circulate the guidance document, because then it will be pretty much a move ahead process. And then we can get the campuses really up and running. We can get the data collection moving. And I think we'll be in a good place to really implement this for the fall semester.
Well, and I do want to say thank you, Dr. Dow, because I feel like you took what was the spirit of the legislation, not only to implement the pieces of it, but you went even further, I think, to honor the spirit of what Senator Elfreth and I and the committee were trying to get at. So I want to switch to something else. And I guess Secretary Piedler, this is more addressed to you as the head of the agency. I know this is not a specific conversation around financial aid, but I just have to say that the nightmare stories that I hear from my students in my district, the nightmare stories, we convened a group of students from across the state with many of the financial aid groups that we've been working with, that Senator Ellis and I worked on last year with our bill, and Delegate Lehrman and I are working on a financial aid bill around the GA cliff and a bunch of other tweaks to financial aid. It's awful. And I guess the one thing that dismays me in particular, and I wanted to just make sure that you had a heads up, because I know we have a specific conversation not only around the agency's budget, but around financial aid. I was really dismayed to see that in even in the last year of the budget, there are still no new pins asked for MHEC, other than the 10 pins that have been mandated by the HBCU legislation, which I'm glad that we'll be able to fund. The nightmare stories I've heard from students, first generation students, who are doing everything we have asked of them to get into college, and because of barriers and frankly systems that don't work, a lack of even getting a living, breathing person to answer a question for them, and the Herculean efforts that college access groups across the state and frankly my staff have had to do to get students the money that they're owed, that we have allocated to them, is just not acceptable. And I'm baffled as to why we haven't figured out what we need to invest properly in the agency to make sure that our financial aid system is run properly, and that even after all the conversations around the hollowing out of the state workforce, we did not see any new pins in MHEC this year other than the 10 that were mandated by our committee in this legislature. So I don't know if you have an answer to that, or if you want to come back to us when you're here later, but I needed to say that. I know we're not getting into the details of financial aid, but it's awful.
Well, I appreciate it. I want to speak to it momentarily, then I will come back to you with a little bit more thorough response. And right up front, OSFA, as you know, has 13 staff members. And at any given time, we've got a couple vacancies. We've got a technology system that at best is 10 years old with Band-Aids and Band-Aids. And a couple of years ago, we went to a new contractor, but it's still Band-Aiding something that needs to be totally replaced and start new, start fresh. That's tens of millions of dollars to do that. Technology can be relied upon for a lot of things, but the human contact is so important. And as you know, this year and last year with COVID, we switched to from in-person contact to online. And in 1 week, they had over 500 conferences, online. And that still doesn't address the fact that there's, as I mentioned, 420,000 people that have gone through OSFA in the last 7 years. So it gives you a little bit, there is a tremendous overwhelming need. All you have to do is look at the national student debt of $1.6 trillion. The average student debt in Maryland, over $28,000. So we're trying to do things to help them through. But some of the statistics, the legislation last year that was put in to mandate high school seniors to fill out the FAFSA, 40% of the students who start to fill out the FAFSA don't even complete it. And that's the first step. We have a large percentage of students that don't even accept the awards that we make. So you do double the work. You do the analysis, you make the award, it doesn't get accepted, time goes by and you have to pull it back and start again. So these are all excuses. I don't like excuses, I like solutions. And so that's what we got to work on, you're right.
Yeah, we do. I mean, we don't like excuses either, Mr. Secretary. We're going to see you 2 more times this year. We're going to see you on financial aid. And frankly, we're hearing from members, from students, from institutions about some of the, inadequacies at MHEC right now. And it starts with you, Mr. Secretary. So we're going to see you a couple more times. We're going to continue with this line of questioning, and I hope you'll continue with some robust answers for us. We had a family in for a hearing just last week, just anecdotally. They called MHEC. They had some doubts as to whether they were going to be eligible for a scholarship. MHEC assured them they would be eligible. They applied for the scholarship. MHEC gave them the scholarship. Their students started college. The money didn't transfer. MHEC assured them that the money was going to transfer. It still didn't transfer. And then months later, lo and behold, they were notified, oh, you're not eligible for this scholarship. These are the kinds of stories that we are hearing from our constituents that we had a public hearing on in the Appropriations Committee that I know you don't want, because that reflects upon you. So we all need to do a better job. We're going to have you 2 more times this year. We're going to continue with this. We're hoping those regulations will be promulgated by our March meeting, and we're hoping we can get some of this financial aid. We're going to be working on this a lot this session together with you, I hope, as a partnership. Delegate Forbes, I think you have a question as well.
The only thing I would ask is, if, in all fairness, if you have specific questions that need to be addressed, if you provide them a little bit in ahead of time, you'll get better answers, more direct answers, more thorough answers. So I would ask that.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Piedler. I'll ask you a question that you can provide in the next time we see you. Has there been talk about decentralizing the College Promise Scholarship Program? Because from my community college, they are not getting awards until well into the school year. And so they're not able to tell students that they know students qualify, but it gets bottlenecked back in MHEC, and the awards aren't awarded until October when classes start much earlier in the year. And so if you would be prepared to speak to that.
Yes, I can. Thank you. One of the immediate things is we have to wait until the individual institution certifies the students in terms of the grade point averages. So that is one of the holdups that happens because they don't even certify until they finish their semester. So, but I'll look into it further for a more thorough answer.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, Mr. Secretary, we appreciate you sticking in with us this afternoon, and we look forward to our February meeting with you on financial aid. I know we'll have lots of questions from the analysts as well as from this committee. So we'll try to get those to you ahead of time. I know the analyst questions will be. If we can get committee questions ahead of time, we will. And we'll see you for your March hearing as well, where we can follow up with any unresolved questions at that time on system office. We're going to go a little bit beyond the bounds of just what the hearings are set for, because like I said, we do have quite a few concerns, and together we're going to get there. Okay, sir?
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you. And thanks for being with us. Thanks to your staff.
Thank you.
I think that concludes our hearing. Thanks to the committee for coming back and sticking in. And I should have mentioned we were joined by the vice chair of the committee, Delegate Chang. So thanks for being with us.